Hello students, I welcome all of you for this program. I am Professor Naval Kishore from School of Management Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Today, I am going to discuss you about Introduction to Planning. The moment you come to hear the word planning, it comes to in your mind that how to do the things in the best possible way. What are the requirements or what are the inputs which should be involved, or what is the best input which should be involved in arriving at particular decision or implementing that decision. For example, you are planning to set up a grocery outlet or let's say a garments outlet. And now if you want to set up that, you have to think over right now itself that in which location you wanted to set up. You have to think what should be the size of your outlet. You have to think how many employees you want to recruit. You have to think the right person for the right job. You have to think how to motivate them, direct them, lead them, control them, etc., so that your decision of setting up a particular store or outlet goes very smoothly. Therefore, planning involves deciding in advance what is to be done in future for a specific period and taking steps to do the things which you decided to do. That means you have to foresee the future. You have to foresee that in what direction you wanted to go ahead. For example, you are a student of BCom. Now, when you want to take the examination, when you want to pursue the course, when you wanted to enroll in this program, you might have thought that this is a program where you need to study this much of hour. This way you are planning to study because you have to pass the BCom examination, you have to prepare for the other competitive examination. For all those things, the step by step, you start thinking right now itself. So therefore, it involves the future thought processing. That means what you wanted to do in future, right now you started thinking that. Second, you think for a specific period. For example, when you are doing the BCom, then you think about these 3 years, that how best you can utilize your time, effort, energy, resources, so that you get best out of your BCom degree. Then you have to think about that what are the necessary steps which are involved in completing your BCom program. For example, you have to prepare your notebooks, you have to submit your assignment, you have to prepare for your term examination, you have to read your study materials which has been supplied by IGNOR to you. All those things you start chalking down. So all those steps you start thinking over. That means either you are a student or you have planned to set up a business house, you have to anticipate that what would be the demand of your products, how you are going to market your products, how you are going to make that product available to the customers, who else would be your customers, in what best possible way you are planning to satisfy your customer, so on and so forth. That means you are trying to anticipate future happenings. And second thing, these are the happenings which are going to influence your organization, which are going to affect your organization. Therefore, when these variables are going to affect your organization, that means you need to think over that how they are going to affect your organization. Then in what direction you wanted to move, in what direction. Then you have to think over that if there is any contingency, how you are going to cope up with those contingencies, because contingency will arrive. For example, the demand of that product gets changed, or there are a lot of suppliers emerge of the same product in the same market. So now all these contingencies, you have to think that how to deal with all these contingencies. So that means you have to determine the course of action, you have to think about alternative steps to be taken, you have to think about immediate and long-term planning. That means if you think that planning, want to define the planning, then the planning is deciding the best alternative to perform different managerial operations for achieving predetermined goals. The definition has been given by Henry Fayol. If you see, then if you analyze this definition, then you will find that it involves your decision. What decision? That best from the alternative form of the steps. So the best from the alternative you are trying to opt for, and you opt that best so that facilitates the achievement of your goal, which you have already decided. For example, you want to compete the competitive examination, you want to compete the CA, you want to compete the IS examination. Now, this is your goals. Now, in order to achieve these goals, how best you can opt or you can choose the best alternative for arriving at or for achieving that particular goal. Next is about planning is an intellectual decision making process in which creative thinking and imagination are essential. This definition has been given by Hans and Massey. If you analyze this definition, then you find that it is an intellectual process. Why intellectual? Because right now, sitting in this room, you start thinking intellectually that setting up business involves this much of the capital, this much of the resources, this much of the input, this much of the staffs, this much of profit you will obtain from this much market share you will get. All these things you start thinking and analyzing right now sitting in this room itself. Therefore, it is an intellectual decision making process. And there is a creative thinking and imagination. Imagination means you are right now imagining. You are imagining that maybe what would be the rate of profit you will be getting, how much capital you will employ, how much interest you are going to pay for the capital, how much market you will get, how you are going to market your products and services, etc., etc. So what you are trying to imagine all these things, and you are also going for the creative thinking. Creative thinking means here you are also thinking that how best you can serve your clientele, how best you can satisfy your customers, how best you can carry out a particular activities related to setting up your business, so on and so forth. It means deciding in advance what is to be done in the future for a specific period and then taking the necessary steps to do the things decided upon. That means you have to decide particular things, and that decisions involves in a particular period of time, and you need to take necessary steps also. Next, it means looking ahead into the future and trying to anticipate what is likely to be, how will it affect the organization, what direction the organization should take, and how to cope with the future events. With this definition, let us come to the nature and characteristics of planning function. The first is primacy of planning. This means that planning precedes all other managerial functions. That means the planning functions is the base for other managerial functions, for example, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, controlling. All these functions are interrelated functions. Interrelated in the sense that if you are going to set up your retail outlets or the grocery outlets, you have to think about whole range of the organization, whole range of putting the right person to the right place. You have to think how you are going to motivate, direct, control, lead all those persons in an organization. You need to have control over all those activities of your outlets. Therefore, the planning procedure is the primacy of planning. It precedes, it creates, it provides base for all the other managerial functions in the organization. Next, planning as a process. Look, when you think about the future, you think in a step-by-step manner. Any activity, it involves several steps. When it stops several steps, so beginning you start that what is your goal, what is your mission, what is your vision. And then you start thinking that what are going to do in order to just obtain or reach to that particular goal, in order to achieve your goal. So you start from, you identified your vision, missions, goal of your organization, and now you are doing all those steps which are required to fulfill that organization, or you are making all those arrangements which are required for the implementation of that plan which you have envisaged. Next, no separate entity. You can just leave this point of no separate entity because no separate entity here means that it is also a part of all other management functions. All other management functions means it is once you plan, and planning also involves all those management functions. Next is pervasiveness of planning. Pervasiveness of planning means planning is required at all levels of managerial hierarchy. This means from the top level of the management to the first level supervisor, planning is required at every place. For example, the chief executives of the organization, they plan for the corporate level. So, their job is to plan about the whole organization. Similarly, when it comes to the mid-level or the first level of the managerial ladder, then the first level or mid-level of managers, they are more involved in the functional planning area. So, the quality and timing, content and quality may differ, but they all are involved in this process. For example, if there is a managerial enterprise, now you are, let's say, planning to produce this pen. And now when you are planning to produce this pen, that means you need production planning. Production planning, I mean that what should be the quantity of this pen, how much you wanted to produce this, in what way you are planning to produce it, where you are planning to produce it. So, the production planning you make. Next, you may think about materials requirement planning. If you want to manufacture this pen, obviously the materials are these plastics, this pen, this body of that pen, then that refill of that pen, etc., etc. All these inputs are required. So, you need to do that materials requirement planning. Then who will manufacture, who will produce the pen? There would be human resources required for the production, for running of the machine, and for having all these, that part you need to assemble together. For all those things you need manpower planning. Next is about financial planning. If you want to manufacture this pen, you need to have finance also. So, therefore, how much finance is required? In which bank you are going to mobilize the resources? Where from you will get the loan, etc., etc. You have to think about in the financial planning. Next is future orientation. As the name suggests, planning is future oriented. That means it is a process of looking ahead and making provision to tackle future events and situations. So, the first you look forward, you look ahead, you look for the future, and then based upon the requirement, based upon the contingency, what you do? You make the provisions for the inputs, for the resources, so that that future contingencies could be met successfully. So, that means you are foreseeing the future, but that does not mean that you are completely discarding the past and present. Past trends and present happenings, they facilitate your planning process, because based on the past information, based on the current information, you are planning for the future. For example, if you are thinking the demand of this pen, so based on you have to think over in past what was the demand of this pen, right now how much is the demand of this pen, and based on you can also foresee that trends that okay, in future there may be this much demand of this pen. Next is about intellectual process. You have already studied about the intellectual process. You must be aware about the intellectual process. That is, there is a conceptual skills which may be required for the purpose of planning. Why it may be required? Because You need to visualize and look ahead. You need to visualize and look ahead for the future. And that you need to look ahead both in terms of abstract as well as concrete terms. Abstract means you are just imagining that, okay, this way your product would be. This would be the shape of your product. And concrete means that you have seen the past record, you have seen the present record, that if in the past there was a demand of, let's say, 1,000 of this pen, right now there is a demand of 2,000 of this pen, then you may expect that, okay, because literacy and all that increasing, therefore the next year the demand of the pen may be this much. So past was 1 lakh, present is 2 lakh, then future may be, let's say, 3 lakhs. So this is a concrete thought of the planning. So future expectation and desire, and you also anticipate opportunities and threat of the environment. Opportunities and threat of the environment means what you are just trying to do that, you think that, okay, once you provide this, once you provide, you are going to offer this pen, then these are the opportunity, these are the market of this pen, and there may be these are the limitations of this pen as well. Next is pragmatic action-oriented. Pragmatic and action-oriented means that whatever you are planning, that should be achievable. You could take action to achieve that. Because as you all know that planning precedes action, and which is the action is taken in advance. This means to think before acting and to decide before doing. This is the part of culture of planning. That means you are thinking before acting. If there is action, you can foresee that action. That means you are thinking before acting and you are trying to decide before doing. If you are trying to decide before doing, obviously there is a probability that the doing part would be in a much, much better way. Next is about information base. As you all know that planning is backed by the information. Information means, as I said you, that you are planning to manufacture this pen. Now you need to collect the information, to get the information on all those aspects of this pen, from the market, from the demand, from the supply, from the competitor, from the cost of production, market side, etc., etc. You need all the information so that you could think about the future. Without information, you can't help yourself. It is very difficult for you to plan. So for that purpose, you need to go for the research in the past trends of this pen, current conditions of this pen, future possibilities of market, etc., etc. Along with, you need to diagnose the planning issues and problems also, so that you could develop alternative course of action. That is best possible action you could opt for. And you need to evaluate them also so that you could make final choice of your plans. Therefore, information base is very important for the planning process. Next is about rationality. See, planning is a rational managerial activity and it is also purposeful. There must be clear idea of planning issues as well as how you are going to handle those issues. For example, if you are entering into the market, now whatever market you are entering, you need to justify that in this market the demand of this pen would be much higher. Therefore, you are planning to enter that particular market. So, you must have the clear idea of that market in whole range of the marketing activities, product, price, planning, etc. You must have there in your mind so that you could fully justify yourself that really you are going to enter in a right market with the right choice of product. Next is about formal and informal nature. See, planning have both formal and informal nature. That means, whenever you are going to plan, you go for the systematic way. Systematic way means that based on some rational logic, you are just planning to plan something. You need to collect all those informations which are required for that purpose. You need to analyze those information in context of your goal which you are planning to achieve. You need to have clear-cut, explicit and open and written information which you wanted to pass on to your organization. So, it should be explicit, open, written information which you wanted to pass to your organization, provide to all the members of your organization. So, when the planning is based on all these formal criteria with systematic and rigorous process of evolving that into the explicit, open, written format, and that you are going to provide in your organization, that falls under formal nature of planning. There may be informal planning also, which is primarily intuitive process. Intuitive process means it is basically word of mouth. It may be based on the trial and error. It may not be that much rigorous. It may be fragmented. It may be intermittent also. So, informal planning primarily it is basically based on trial and error. It is not that much rigorous as the formal planning is, and it is an intuitive. Suppose the manager thinks something that okay, in this way the manufacturing process can take place, in this way marketing process can take place. So, not much of the explicit, open, written, stage by step or rigorous process may not be followed in the informal nature of planning. Next is planning as a form of decision making. As you all know that planning involves problem solving and decision making. When you are talking about the problem solving, that involves identification of issues, problems which require some decision, collection of information, evaluation of alternative courses, and choice of the most appropriate alternatives. What do you do in your decision making? You evolve all those alternatives. You think over all those issues. you think over all the problems. For example, when you are manufacturing the pen, you may think about that what would be the problems. Demand may not be that much, cost of production may be more, your competitors may be more informative, your competitors may have more a strategy, so on and so forth. So therefore, when you are planning, particularly for the decision making, you have to decide upon that, and you have to, while making a decisions, you have to think about whole range of organizational objectives. You have to think about strategies, you have to think about policies, you have to think about procedures, you have to think about other plans, because all these things require mobilization, allocation and commitment of resources and efforts in a particular way to achieve your goal. Next is planning premises. As you may be aware that whenever you are planning something, it is based on certain assumptions and estimates about the future behavior of events and situations. So whenever you are planning, there may be certain assumptions for that. Based on particular assumptions, you plan. And those assumptions are known as planning premises, which are derived through the process of forecasting. That means managers make promises or assumptions about the future events for the purpose of planning. And based on certain assumptions, you arrive at that particular decision to have a plan or to plan or to execute in your organization. Next is dynamism. Obviously, planning is a dynamic process. It is a process of making, you decided selectively for your organization. And now if there is any changes, your selective decisions, now you need to change the decision as per requirement of the environmental forces. That means you need to have flexible, there need to have adaptability, etc., etc. This is called dynamic. Next is levels of planning. It may be divided into a few levels. For example, based on a scope, you may have corporate planning, you may have functional planning. Similarly, based on the significance, you may have tactical planning or operational planning. Based on the time, you may have long-term planning and short-term planning. Next is types of plans. The plans may be single-use plans, may be standing plans. If you are planning for a specific purpose, that is called the single-use plan. And if it is a non-repetitive type of the things, that is called standing plans. Next, let us come to the importance of planning. First, provides direction. Planning provides a clear sense of direction to the activities of the organization. It provides confidence in understanding where the organization is heading and how best way you are going to achieve the target, objectives, the goals of the organization. When you want to take some measures wherever there is any deviation. So therefore, planning provides you direction. Next is provides opportunity to analyze alternative course of action. Obviously, you need to examine and analyze all the courses, all the alternatives which you may have for the planning purpose, so that when you analyze them, then you can make the decision for the best alternatives which may be available or which may be suitable for your own organization, and you need to judge, proceed very cautiously to choose the most flexible and favorable course of action. Next is reduces uncertainty. As you are aware that when you are forcing tomorrow, tomorrow is highly uncertain. But based on certain assumptions, you can foresee tomorrow and you can think beyond immediate concerns for the tomorrow. Because you may probe the things, you may break down the complexities, you may think over environmental uncertainties, you may have control for the activities so that it could be tuned toward the future direction which is suitable for your organization. Next is minimizes impulsive and arbitrary decisions. Obviously, it tends to minimize impulsive decision because it is based on rationality, it is based on certain information, etc., etc. Therefore, it minimizes the arbitrary decision. Next is kingpin function. Obviously, it is the main functions because it is involved in motivating, supervision, leadership, communications, implementations, etc., etc. Therefore, it is a kingpin function. Next is resource allocation. Obviously, you all are aware that every activity requires resources. Similarly, the production activities also require resources, and through planning you have to think overall competitive positions of the organization, and therefore you need to allocate the strategic resources which may include funds, competent executives, technological talents, good contacts with government, dealer network, and so on and so forth. So these are resources are to be mobilized for the planning purpose. Next is resource use efficiency. Obviously, whatever inputs are, for example, you have the assets, you have the resources, you have the capabilities, and you have to employ them in a best efficient way. You have to remove the loopholes, you have to close the gaps, you have to rectify the deficiency, you have to reduce wastage and leakage of funds, materials, efforts, and skills, so on and so forth, so that the overall improvement in resources may take place and you may gain efficiency. Next is adaptive responses. Because external environment has been changing, so in order to deal with the changing external environment, you need to adapt your responses. Next is anticipative action. You have to be competitive in the environment. Therefore, you have to go for the environmental scanning and you need to change according to requirement of the environment. And the last is your integration. The whole functions of management are to be integrated through the planning so that you are able to achieve your goal with the provided resources which you have mobilized. So today you have learned about what planning is all about, what are the nature of planning, scope of the planning, importance of the planning. Thank you very much.